This episode is brought to you by CBD TV, your one-stop shop for all your CBD needs. Use code FRESHOUT to get 15% off your next order. Hey, what's up everybody? Big Herc 916 getting down fresh out. You tuned in to another dope interview. Make sure you hit that subscribe button, like, share this channel. We're doing big things. Man, we're on the cutting edge on YouTube, and a lot of times we don't get our credit. But we have with us today somebody who was involved in law enforcement, very educated, and has some questions that can be answered that mainstream media doesn't want to talk about and address. And by this person coming on our show, we are hoping to create some dialogue and maybe cause some change of consciousness of what's going on with the opinion of the police. And me being an ex-felon, you probably would assume I'd be the last person to want to sit down with somebody in law enforcement, but I'm open to hear anything that's going to uplift and educate. So I have here with me David Bohler. I'm gonna let him tell you a little bit about his background, where he's from, and his knowledge as far as working in law enforcement.
So, pleasure to be here, Big Herc. So my background is, I graduated high school, went into the military, like 5 days after I graduated high school. I served better part of 10 years, ultimately got out and went straight into law enforcement in 1997. Worked in every position there was to have except for canine. I worked as a patrol officer, patrol sergeant. I was a SWAT team member, SWAT commander. Worked in the administrative side of the house, and ultimately, before it was all said and done, was a captain over internal affairs. I had taken an early retirement from the last agency where I was a captain, and then basically moved into a position where my rank was detective lieutenant. And it was a very small agency, and this agency was in Tennessee. We had, where all of the detectives were equivalent to the rank of lieutenant, and that's where my story of corruption, things like that, began.
So, having been involved in law enforcement for a number of years, and with a lot of what's going on in the mainstream media with what they consider bad cops and good cops and the whole defunding the police, I'm totally against defunding the police. I as an ex-felon, man, I tell you right now, I wouldn't want renegades trying to self-police the community. These guys thinking that they're some type of subgroups. I feel that just there's a way to do things, because I don't want to have to worry about my family or my mother or somebody not being safe, or having like my kids or future kids or friends' kids being able to walk to school safely, and just protect us. So what would, when people say things like that as far as defunding the police, what comes to mind in your opinion that can create some positive change?
Well, first of all, you've spoken a lot about this on prior videos, things like that. As well as I do, when there's anarchy, ultimately somebody's going to police, right? There is going to be some kind of internal government. There is going to be somebody running the show. There's going to be somebody that's going to establish some kind of order. Whether or not we like that order one way or another, you've got to have somebody that's going to restore a lawful peace, right? If you don't like the cops now, wait till you see the replacements. That's my first thing.
Yeah.
As far as your question, and I might be getting off a little bit off topic, but you're talking about the defunding of the police. I think that's the last thing that needs to happen. Police officers require training. police officers require a lot of psychological evaluations, and they need other support systems in place, and these things cost a lot of money. Now, I'm of the belief that you can do more with less police officers if those police officers that you have are highly trained, well paid, and taken care of. That there are systems in place to look after their well-being, and if you're looking after that police officer's well-being, you're looking after the public. So I guess that's my thing. First of all, I think defunding the police is the worst thing that you could do.
And when I hear a lot of that, I see a lot of political narratives behind that, and that's one of the first things that comes to mind, in my opinion. And even myself, having had interactions with police, I'm not against having police in the community. I've met some good cops. I met and of course, whenever you have people who could also be bad. I mean, it's no different than, guys around the neighborhood. You got some guys that are good and you got some people that are bad. So you can't say that one apple makes the whole bag rotten. And I know you have also, firsthand experience on being a good cop and actually bringing to light some negative elements and having to deal with that. Could you elaborate on that?
Yes, sir. So in the final year of my law enforcement career, I stumbled upon information and actual evidence to support an allegation that a citizen had made against our assistant chief of police and one of his junior lieutenants. And basically, this citizen had been set up in a sense. Basically, he notified me that the assistant chief was contracted, either he was paid for or basically requested by his personal friend to set him up to basically fabricate evidence and ultimately arrest him, because this man had a civil lawsuit against the assistant chief's best friend. Ultimately, there was an investigation into this. This investigation went on. There were this went on for months. Several investigators looked into it. Several interviews were conducted and recorded, but somehow, mysteriously, this assistant chief somehow dodged a bullet. Mysteriously, everything got swept up under the rug. Now, when this citizen that was basically the target of their investigation contacted me, the first time I looked into it, there was no evidence of what he was alleging. There was no police report showing that this man was even the subject of any investigation. That was by design. Ultimately, those that were responsible for what they were doing to this man had deliberately withheld and concealed their police report for, I think it was 15 days. And that was right around the time I was looking to see, was this guy even the subject of an investigation? It was months later, I was requested by the district attorney to pull some police reports on several different cases. These cases were getting ready to go to trial or to be presented to the grand jury. It was a slew of cases. Well, I pulled this one case, and I'm going through just making sure I'm giving the district attorney the right stuff. And then I see the citizen's name on one of those reports. Of course, I get to looking into it, and sure enough, everything that he alleged was going on in that police report. He wasn't lying about anything. By the time that I found this out, he had already been charged and was facing a 5-year prison sentence minimum if he'd lost at trial. His trial was maybe 3-4 weeks away at the time when I stumbled across this information. I went through proper channels. I reported this to my chain of command, which started with my supervisor all the way up to we had an acting chief of police at the time. Nobody did anything. Meanwhile, the clock is ticking on this man. At this, by this time, this man's whole life has been upset. He's being, his wife is obviously embarrassed by everything. his kid, the stigma's rubbing off towards his kids. He's having to sell his home because he wants to move out of that area, out of our jurisdiction, because he's afraid somebody else is going to set him up. Basically, his life had been turned upside down, and guess what? He had given up on me too. This is the guy that had reached out to me 6 months before, and I couldn't find any evidence. Next thing you know, he's being charged, and he's getting ready to get sent up. So I gave my chain of command plenty of time to do something about this, to make this stop, make it go away, because it was clear that the primary investigating officer had lied on his police report. When that didn't happen, on my own time, I picked up a telephone and I texted the district attorney directly. And I said, there's big problems with this case. You need to talk to me. We need to talk about it. I can't remember everything I said, but after I got there, I was off duty at the time. I was on my way to work. Then ultimately, when I got to work, I picked up the telephone, and we talked for a while. And I said, and I basically laid out all of the problems with this case. And this citizen was being set up and was basically going to get pushed. He was set up for a 5-year prison sentence minimum under federal firearms laws. So.
Man, for a citizen, dealing with something like this, and for them to put that trust in your hands, that's a big burden to carry, and for you having to actually come forth. I mean, what moved you to do that, knowing that you could compromise yourself? Because if it got back to the people you were talking about, it would compromise your job.
Well, first of all, I've like I said, I commanded an internal affairs division before.
Okay.
I've always kept my oath, and had I found evidence when this citizen first told me about it, if I had found evidence to substantiate what he had told me, I would have acted right then and there.
Wow.
So the moment that I found evidence to substantiate it, that's when I got back involved in this. So it wasn't for fear. I don't care what an administration is going to do to me for reporting this. Honestly, I'd never encountered this before. If there were crooked cops that I'd ever worked with before, they knew better than to let me find out about it, because I'd never seen anything like this kind of setup. But I would have immediately blown the whistle the second that I heard about it, and I did. The second I found something to substantiate it, because let's be real, citizens complain on cops all the time. And if somebody's truly looking into it, you find out a lot of time it's because they're just worried about something, some charge that's on them that they deserve, something that they did. Ultimately, you'll find evidence to support what the officer did. I'll say 98% of the time, that's what the case is. So when this person contacted me, I think he contacted me, I was off duty. He actually knew a friend of mine who had my number. He called me, and I told him I'd look into it, and I did. I said, it doesn't even look like you're going to be charged, because there's no police report, there's no nothing. So if something comes down, or if you feel like I've not done enough, contact the chief of police or go to our state investigative agency, it's Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. I never heard back from him until I found this police report 6 months later, 7 months later. I get to looking at it. I'm like, oh, well, he wasn't lying, because the first line on the police report was clearly a lie. It said basically that our department was investigating a report of some stolen guns being inside of our city. Well, if that had been the case, all I investigated was violent crime. I never investigated narcotics. Being perfectly honest, I always felt like weed ought to be legal. I feel like people should be left alone to do what they want to do. My deal was the whole time, most of my career, except for the times that I was in internal affairs, I hunted violent people. People that preyed on other people. What people want to do with their own bodies, I'm not real interested in. So when this came across, and the first line of this report said, there was a report of some stolen guns. Well, I know that had there been a real authentic report of some stolen guns from another agency in our jurisdiction, I would have known about it, because that was my bag. That's what I did.
So what was the outcome of that? I mean, as far as with that citizen, were they able to vindicate themselves or?
All charges were dismissed.
Wow.
You know, that's the one great thing. You know, that's the reason why I can sleep at night.
Wow.
His charges were dismissed. Of course, he moved on out of that jurisdiction. He didn't want to get set up again. There was an investigation launched into this. One of the players that was involved in this case that set him up was terminated. But the assistant chief, who was basically the ringleader, survived, primarily because his father was the vice mayor in charge of the or part of the city commission at the time. And there was a lot of personnel changes. Basically, the city manager was the shot caller as far as who got fired, who didn't. At one point, the assistant chief was fired by the then city manager. So then the commission got together, led by the vice mayor. They fired that city manager and brought in another guy that would bring their boy back.
Wow.
That's precisely what happened.
Wow.
And I make no bones about it. My case is still ongoing. Everything I say here, I kind of jeopardized it a little bit. I don't care. I've not been quiet about it at all. The sumbitch they brought in there is the definition of crooked. Left his last agency under a great deal of scrutiny for some missing funds and some other things right before he came to our department. So ultimately, well, right around the time that I reported all of this, instantly the harassment from inside, people that were my friends, my partners, colleagues, started.
This turned on you?
Yes, sir. One of the guys that I really thought a lot of. He was a young, upcoming patrolman. I had spent a lot of time teaching him things, showing him things, and he was one of those guys that was a real go-getter on patrol. That you could count on him. If I was looking for somebody that I couldn't find during my hours of work, I could pass it off on to him. And if he couldn't find him, you knew he was looking for him. He was a good cop, right? Suddenly, this guy starts turning on me. I start hearing about things he said behind my back. Suddenly, where I've got text messages from him where he's, talking about, hey, man, you're doing great. Appreciate all the hard work, blah, blah, blah. The next thing I'm hearing is, this guy's called you every name under the sun. And I couldn't understand why. Then it started to click, He was involved in that case.
Oh, wow.
Had no idea. His name wasn't on the report. He was present for one of the interviews. And ultimately, when he was asked about it, he said, that was some assistant chief and his buddy shit. I don't want nothing to do with it, and if you got any questions about it, you can ask them. So that's what told me this guy's involved. Started dealing with a lot of that, and then the whole internal. It was actually an external investigation. They brought the sheriff's department in to investigate the department. Nothing made sense. This went on. Like I said, it dragged on for 6-8 months until they brought in this crooked city manager who got hired that basically put an end to that investigation, basically cut it off. The assistant chief, amazingly, was found with no wrongdoing whatsoever and was ultimately reinstated. Then the game started playing against me. Next thing you know, I'd actually gotten married at that time. My wife was a patrol officer. We just got back from our honeymoon, and 2 days later I get called into the office and told that they're eliminating the rank and position of detective. How are you going to eliminate your detectives? Who's going to investigate your chomos? Who's going to investigate your murders? Who's going to investigate all of that violent stuff? It ain't going to be a patrol officer. They don't have the time, they don't have the experience, and they're not equipped for it. It didn't make any sense. Ultimately, what it was something to push me out, basically force me to retire. And that's what happened.